First off, let me thank Christy and Jenny. I think they put together 4 very interesting combination folks. I don't think I've ever been part of a group where there was such a fun diversity of approaches, ideas. If there's no way that you could not be percolating all kinds of questions that you weren't thinking about already. So congratulations, you guys. Great idea. So what I want to do is essentially give you a sense of what the American Cancer Society uses as our mechanisms for funding research. I can't say that we're unique in terms of nonprofits, but I think those of you who are thinking about how to get funding for your research besides going to government agencies, and at some level industry as well. Ours is a very successful model. It's not the only model, and I have some limited experience with some of the other nonprofits, and I'll be glad to provide whatever I can in terms of that context as well. But I want to really focus primarily on what the ACS does. So just as a quick background on who I am, got my PhD in genetics, University of Arizona, postdoc training in Pittsburgh and UCSD, was on the NIH staff for a while, then in the cell biology department at Emory until 2007 when I left Emory and became a scientific program director at the ACS. What I want to do today is primarily tell you who we are, make you aware of a limited number of our funding opportunities, give you a sense of what our process is, why we look actually a bit different than the NIH and the NSF, and then a little bit of, not really grantsmanship, but some of the things that you need to be thinking about in terms of how to write good grants for the ACS, and it will work almost everywhere else as well. So who are we? We are experts in cancer research and training, and I would like to emphasize we're across the entire cancer continuum, and you'll see what I mean by that in a minute, but we fund research from DNA repair all the way to health policy and everything in between. We have 6 program directors, and between us and our senior VP, we've got over 240 years of total research experience in cancer research and training. And I think the ACS has a long-standing reputation for getting it right. We are the nation's largest private, non-governmental, non-for-profit funder of cancer research. The research program began in 1946 with a $1 million donation from Mary Lasker of the Albert and Mary Lasker Awards. Since 1946, we've invested over $4.6 billion in cancer research. That's reflected in 24,000 different investigators at more than 1,100 institutions. One of the things that I think we're very proud of is since 2004, more than 70% of the junior faculty that we have provided funding for have gone on and successfully secured NIH R-level funding. I think that's a record of success that's unmatched. 70% of all the NCI designated cancer center directors are former ACS grantees, and there are 47 ACS grantees who were funded early on in their career who went on and got Nobel Prizes. So I think we're pretty good at what we do. Here are the 6 different programs that the ACS research adventure is broken up into. You'll see that we go from molecular genetics and biochemistry through cell biology. There's a preclinical and translational group, a clinical group that includes an immunology committee, cancer control and prevention, and health professional training. Now, each one of these programs has 3 peer review committees in it, except for the health professional group that's got 4. And each one of these program directors is responsible for all of the grant applications that comes in to each one of these committees. As of yesterday, we have 750 grants in effect worth a little bit over $407 million. The dots are where they're distributed nationwide, and yes, not surprisingly, it's a bit bi-coastal, but I think it's important to point out we really do fund research anywhere in the country. We are looking to find the best research, the best researchers, wherever they are. So, for instance, we have folks in Wyoming. We just had somebody funded in the University at Boise State in Idaho because their projects met the highest level of our peer review. We don't care where you come from. You don't have to be at Harvard. You don't have to be at UCSF. You don't have to be at Johns Hopkins. If you're doing good research and you apply to us, we'll find you. So let's look at what I really want to do is I want to spend the majority of my time talking about our two major funding mechanisms and then some of the things that distinguish the way we do peer review at the ACS relative to most other agencies. So our our largest part of our portfolio is our so-called research scholar grants. These are grants that are our equivalent to an R01. So these are for early investigators in their first 6 years of having their first independent position. And independent is critical. And it's becoming harder and harder as more people are put onto creative tracks by their institutions and are genuinely just trying to find ways to keep their careers going. There's getting to be a grayer and grayer line about what independence means. But it's an important component for us that you have some evidence that the institution is invested in you and your individual career, your individual research projects. The awards for up to 4 years at $165,000 per year plus 20% indirects. One of the nice things that's a difference between us and the government is that we forward fund the project. So if you get one of our 4-year, $165,000 a year plus 20% indirect grants, that means we have put aside, at the time that we give you that award, we have put aside $792,000 for that project. There's no chance that you will come into year 2 and be told, oh, I'm sorry, your budget's been cut by 10%, 12%, 15%. That money is set aside. It's going to be there guaranteed, so you can be secure during those 4 years that you're going to get that $165,000 a year, every year. Now, these grants, like I said, are generally designed for people during the first 6 years of their first independent position. In the area of cancer control, we have a couple of exceptions to this, primarily because there's very few people in these areas, and we're trying to build up the population of scientists. So in the area of cancer control, you can be at any stage of your career if you're studying health policy, health services research, or you're studying cancer disparity, cancer equity questions. And also in their particular cases, there are, if you're doing population studies, there's the opportunity to have somewhat larger budgets than $165,000 a year. But they have to be very well justified. If you don't get funded the first time, you can come back twice to us, unlike the NIH, which is still, for most of their R01 type mechanisms, you're still only allowed 1 resubmission. For us, you're allowed 2 resubmissions for our RSG grants. I using numbers from 2004 just because they were easily, that slide was easily available. We just saw the numbers yesterday, as a matter of fact, from 2016. They look very similar in terms of distribution. Roughly 70% of our research budget will go into research scholars every year. The next two largest ones are the postdoctoral fellowships at just under 12, and our mentored research scholars, which are 11.5. I'm going to talk to you about the postdocs. I'll mention the research scholars if somebody wants to ask more about them, but I'm really going to focus on the research scholar grants, the largest component, and the postdoctoral fellows. Now, that's a nice round circle. But how many dollars are we talking about? We're talking about a research budget of roughly $100 million a year. And why are we still focusing on first-time investigators? Because of things like this. Now, those numbers are not what we would like them to be in terms of our 70 to 75 and 70 numbers. In fact, through 15 and 16, that number went back up to 75 again for us. The NCI's number dropped below 140. So in fact, the American Cancer Society is funding roughly a third of all early time investigators. So those that are getting their first time RO1s, we're funding the equivalent of those at about 30% of all of those young investigators who are getting funded at all. And partly that's because when you apply to the ACS, you're only competing against other young investigators. You're not competing against large, well-established laboratories. You're competing against other young folks, other people who are at roughly the same stage of their career. Playing field is a little bit more level. So I'm not going to tell you anything that's profound here in terms of grantsmanship, but these are the kinds of things that really do matter. You need to be able to, when you apply, to be able to explain to the peer review committee why you are the person to do this research, why you've got the right preliminary data, you've got the right approaches, you've got the right mindset, you have the right training to be the person to do this work, not somebody else. You'll be judged essentially entirely upon your past accomplishments, your productivity, and your future potential. I mean, that's what everything is all about, right? What have you done? What are you going to do? And how can you establish that what you've done makes a difference? You've got to be able to demonstrate that you are independent. Even if you're at the same institution as your mentor, you have to be able to prove that you're not just an appendage of a mentor's laboratory. And that's where one of those gray areas I was talking about. Research assistant professors are welcome to apply, but they have to be able to establish that they're independent. You have to demonstrate that you're becoming a leader in the field. You don't have to be a leader in the field, but that you are out there, you're starting to have an impact, that you're able to build a team, and that you have individual institutional support. So things like dedicated lab space, some kind of startup funding, some kind of salary support. All of these things need to be in the letter from the chair, again, establishing that the institution is invested in your career, your individual career, not the career of a larger group. The research plan obviously needs to be hypothesis-driven. We are genuinely interested in novel ideas. Even though we have a fiduciary responsibility to use our donors' dollars as wisely as possible, we feel it's a responsibility of ours also to be willing to take risks on projects that a lot of other institutions, both profit, nonprofit, and governmental, are more reluctant to take a chance on. We really do, when we say we want novel projects, that is one of our major criteria. Obviously, you've got to be able to think through the plan, and is it cancer relevant? Now, being the American Cancer Society, cancer relevant could be a very narrow definition, but you saw our programs to start with. A DNA repair committee, an RNA repair committee. We've got an endocrinology committee. The three committees I'm involved with. One is a cell cycle committee. One of them is a cell structure and metastasis cell motility committee. The third one is a model systems committee, where if you're doing Drosophila, if you're doing, I've got two applications in right now. One of them is in on Stentor, and the other one's a Planaria grant. And they're gonna be competing with everybody else. But if you can justify why a cancer community would be interested in your biology project, then we think it's cancer relevant. And when you come at us with four years of $165,000 budget, you really do need to think about why you need that budget for that amount of time. We really do take it into account that we're giving you almost $800,000 for 4 years. We want to make sure that the investment has been thought through on your part. One of the things that generally means is about a 20%, 25% investment of your time as the principal investigator. So like I said, the second thing I want to talk about, whoops, went backwards. Second thing I want to talk about is postdoctoral fellowships. Now, postdocs we give for 1 to 3 years with a progressive stipends of $48,000, $15,000, $52,000 a year. They are designed for people in the first 4 years application. You're eligible to apply during the first 4 years after you've gotten your degree. So, for instance, if you got your degree before April of 2013 at the moment, for our last cycle, which was April 1st, you'd no longer be eligible, but you're eligible for 1, 2, or 3 years after that. It's a stipend only, there is no indirects. And but we do give you 4 years or 3 years of a $4,000 allowance that you can use for equipment, you can use for travel. Oftentimes you can use it to supplement health insurance. And then in the last year, we give you an extra $1,500 to make sure that you've attended at least one scientific meeting. We are running one of our own that we encourage those people late in their careers to do. And unlike the research scholar grants, with the postdocs you get one resubmission application. Now, what are the criteria that qualify you to be competitive? Obviously, your past accomplishments and your future potential. Productivity is a lot more relative with a postdoc. You don't necessarily have to have had 4 senior or first author papers, but have you had a single first author paper that had an impact? Those are the kinds of ways we try and measure productivity, not in numbers, but by impact. Letters are always critical, and they need to be personal. You need to use reviewers, letter writers, who really know you, who know what the struggles were that you may have gone through as a graduate student, how motivated and how really driven you were. One of the things that we really strive to reward is people who are really stretching themselves out. Lots of folks try and stay very close to what they did as a graduate student. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for people who really are wanting to expand their horizons. The mentor, obviously, more than anything, is there a record of success mentoring? And if, especially these days, there's a real desire for young postdocs to go into laboratories of young scientists. And that oftentimes means they don't have a lot of mentoring experience. We don't discourage that, but we really do strongly recommend you use a co-mentor of some kind at that point. Somebody who is willing to help the mentor learn how to mentor. Again, these are all things that are obvious. I really won't belabor them. We do ask for a lay summary in all of our applications. Write it as if you're writing it for your grandmother. Don't use all of the comfortable language for you, because this is what we use to go out into the community and try and find extra donors for research for projects that we can't quite fund. And if they can't understand it, then you go very much farther down the bottom of the queue. Okay. 2 deadlines a year, April 1st, October 15th. You submit your applications online at Proposal Central. We ask then also 1 hard copy be sent to us. They go to the 6 programs, 19 peer review committees. We ask you for a recommendation as to what program you think it belongs to, but quite honestly, we look at them all and we decide which committee we think has the best expertise. We will then give you our recommendation. You're welcome to question it, ask us why you thought it went there if you want to. And sometimes we'll switch them because you make a compelling argument why you think it's someplace else. But we make all the final decisions as to where it goes. The April submissions are reviewed in June at some point. The Octobers are in January. We have the 19 peer review committees. This is one of the most important things that I do, which is to make sure that I've got the right people in the room to look at each one of those grants. So if I have 20 grants, if I have 50 grants in a committee, I'm looking at the distribution ahead of time. I have a standing committee, but I'm always adding ad hocs to make sure that I've got the right people in the room so that I can create the best review processes possible. There are stakeholders, community stakeholders, who are lay people who are part of each one of our peer review committees, whose job is to put the scientists' feet to the fire and ask them, where's the cancer relevance to that project? And occasionally we come to the state where everybody thought the science was really good, but the applicant didn't make a very compelling case for why it was cancer relevant. Maybe even the reviewers can see the relevance, but if you as the applicant don't make the case, it will cost you. On top of the peer review committee, then the peer review committees recommend an order. They recommend who they think should be funded. Our extramural council, which is senior scientists most of the time, they're cancer center directors, people who've been on peer review committees before. They're the ones we actually give the dollars to, and they're the ones who actually make the final decision. I want to spend the last couple of minutes here. So peer review committees, they look at, say, 50 grants. And of the 50 grants, they will rank order all 50 of those grants. And say that at the end of the day, they say the first 6 grants here, they think are worth funding. Those are grants that, as far as they're concerned, if the money's there, that project should be funded now. Well, that's well and good. Council comes around, they got the money, and they've only got enough money to fund the first 3 grants. Okay? So those 3 get funded. What happens to the other 3 that the committee said were fundable? They are put on what are called our pay-if line. That is, if we can find additional funds, those projects are ready to go now. There's no more resubmissions, there's no more modifications that they need. If we can find additional funds, those projects can be funded. And quite honestly, out of our postdoctoral fellowships every year, we probably fund an extra 15 to 20 projects that are pay-if projects. So that pay-if line really is important. And it's important because our reviewers do one thing, and I'll be finished here in just a second. Our reviewers do one thing that the NIH doesn't do, which is they sat there with those 6 and they decided the 6 initial were all ready to go. Then they all stop, they go back over those 6 grants individually as a collective group, and they discuss each one of those 6 a second time to come up with what they collectively think is the best order of those 6, so that they not only come up with a number generator, but they actually have discussed for a second time to make sure that they got the order of those grants right. Very unique to the ACS. As far as I know, there's no other organization who does that, to try and make sure they get the best grants. And when there's limited funds, that distinction is important. So let me stop, and we can talk about what we do differently in terms of feedback after you've gotten your pink sheets from us. We can talk about that in the session later. You've got available information. Go to cancer.org/research. It's all in there. And if you have any questions, you can get hold of me. You can get hold of our grants office. And thank you very much.